We today will be having a conversation with my transgender sisters from the community, Bree Campbell and Emani Love, community activists. We came back today. First of all, I want to let you know that you're at Urban Nation Radio and you want to talk to us and talk to these wonderful ladies. Call us at 313-867-1306 or 313-867-1305. Okay, let's get started. Today we're going to be talking about, this is a continuation from last week's conversation when we had our LGBTQ Detroit police liaison to the gay community, Officer Danny Woods and John Trimble, and Bree was on the show. Today, from that show, we were talking about our transgender sisters coming in and just talking to us about struggles, talking about triumphs, talking about the community and everyday life, so we can dispel some of the myths and some of the misconceptions that people have about our transgender community. Also, how the community overall can be a help to support our sisters and just all of the organizations and different supports that are available. How can we bring more attention to and raise awareness and everybody get involved? Because at the end of the day, we all share one thing in common: we're all human. And so we need to, I think, bring this more to the forefront, and that is the purpose of Spiritually Speaking. Amen. Spiritually Speaking is that I don't want to tell everybody else's story. I want people to tell their story so we can bring community awareness and bring healing to our community and unity. So, beginning with that, Emani, introduce yourself. We know who Bree is. We know who Bree is. Emani Love, introduce yourself to our audience.
Peace and love, everyone. My name is Emani Love. I am a Detroit trans justice activist. I advocate on behalf of all trans, identifying, and gender nonconforming people.
Okay.
And I'm also an outreach worker at Vibez Center. I help to oversee the drop-in program, and I also am the facilitator of our Trans Just Us program, which is a program that provides sacred space for trans women of color between 18 and 30 to talk and reflect.
Tell us about your journey. What's been your journey? Tell as much as you want or as little as you want. But tell us about life for Emani before you became activist extraordinaire. Tell us about just everyday life, growing up, how you came to be who you are, and just proudly who you are.
Okay. I've been transitioning for 7 years. I started at 14. I went to an African-centered school, and I think that that environment in the 8th grade was really the space that I really began to understand myself, and that I became overwhelmed with so many different energies. In the 8th grade, I was expelled from school for wearing lip gloss. It was definitely there were more reasons than one, but I was written up for wearing lip gloss. There was one of the 7th grade instructors, for some reason, was like extremely offended, and he kind of physically forced me to wipe the lip gloss off. I'm like, it's just lip gloss. I didn't even know it was tinted at first. So I proceeded to wear it, and I think that moment there really showed me how complex humanness is, how complex it is to be human, how our identities are not limited to our bodies, that they intersect with every facet of our existence. So around the age of 18, well, I'm sorry, I'm going to go back a little bit. Shortly after 8th grade, when I went into 9th grade, I went to Kettering High School, and I was just at a very, very vulnerable and sensitive state in my life, and I didn't know how to, I didn't really know how to receive opposition. I didn't know how to receive people who could not love me and affirm me for who I was. So that naturally that put me in a space where I didn't even want to be associated with school. I dropped out of school at 14, and I ended up going back to finish my high school diploma and when I was 17, but that didn't work out. And so around 2012, I went to the Ruth Ellis Center for the first time. I had never been, and when I went in there, I always talk about how healing that space was for you to share space with people who share in your identity, that affirms you. And I felt really alone. I was really lonesome at one point. I didn't know any other trans women. I was by myself. I wasn't exposed to the LGBTQ plus community of Detroit, nowhere near the capacity that I am now. So that was very transformative and beautiful. And when I went to Ruth Ellis Center, I got involved with programming. I was a part of different leadership, youth leadership projects. I really got immersed in social science and understanding and defining oppression and recognizing it. And that's really helped to provide a much needed clarity to the lens that I see life through so that I could navigate things better and teach people and teach love.
Let me ask you a question. At the age of 8th grade, thinking back on that, your family structure, in meeting young people at that age now, struggling with the same issues you were at that age, what would you say to their parents? I asked this question of somebody else that was on my show, and my concern was when parents begin to see children either, oh, they may be gay, oh, they may be different or whatever. They have nothing to fear. You and I know, really, after all that we've gone through, they have nothing to fear, but they are afraid. And so what would you say to someone's parents, who has a child who's different and who's probably struggling with their sexual orientation?
Okay. To their parent, I think more than anything, I can say that I have understanding and empathy for them, because I understand how certain institutions of our society, like heterosexism, can influence how you see things and how we love people. And that's fine also, but I would tell their parent that human sexuality and human gender is way beyond heterosexuality, and it's way beyond fitting the gender norm, the gender binary. And I would, tell them that, that oftentimes when we don't have an understanding of something, it's hard for us to even deem one's journey valid when we don't understand. And it's really interesting when you lack empathy, the ability to understand what someone else is going through. That puts you in a very oppositional space, and a space that could be unhealthy mutually. I would encourage them to understand that gender is something that is not limited to the physical body, because gender identity is a real thing. There's a significant difference between gender identity and biological sex. Biological sex speaks to our bodies, how we are anatomically constructed. Gender identity speaks to a very kind of a psychological understanding. In our psychology, our emotional and spiritual identities are as valid as our physical identities.
Tell me about the services at Ruth Ellis Center. That brings a smile to your face every time I say Ruth Ellis Center. And the young people that you encounter there and how you support them. And I know you nurture them. I know you mother them and mentor them.
A significant majority of you who come to Ruth Ellis Center, I am kind of like, these are my Ruth Ellis babies. It's like every generation of outreach workers you have, though, whoever came during that generation are your babies, and they are my babies. A lot of them identify, for the most part, as gay men. We do have some young trans individuals, young trans men, and young trans women. And I think that with knowing what I've gone through, and I kind of recycle that negative energy in a way that blesses others. And some people come to me having questions, whether it be questions about their journey, their current journey with their gender identity, or I'm just wanting to know, how do I love people who identify outside of how I identify? And I do a group there called Trans Peace. It's for young trans people and our allies. And what I think that everyone should have their space. I think that men should be afforded their space, women should be afforded their space, because we all have different specific issues specific to our identity. And it's important to have that space. But I thought, for the sake of having Trans Peace, that I would open it up to allies, people who are not transgender or gender nonconforming, so that they can be equipped to fight alongside us, because no movement has ever been progressive without allies.
What do you have to say about that? Add to that, Ms. Bree.
I think everything Emani said was on point. Before I start, I want to give a shout out to my mother, Beverly Rouse, who has given birth to me, who supported me through my journey, and who also named me. I think that Emani made a very good point about allies and education. Growing up for me was a little bit more challenging, because I knew at 3 years old that something about me was different, but because I grew up in a household where everyone's gender identity matched their physical gender, I struggled, because I knew it was something, but I knew it was something I couldn't talk about. And I came from a very abusive household. My stepfather was abusive, and my uncles were abusive, and everyone was trying to, instead of asking me how I felt and how I identified, it was all of these things that were being forced on me. So for a long time, I knew, but because I didn't have a space to be able to talk about it or to be around people who identified the same way I did, I kind of reverted, and all of my issues became internal. I was very depressed. For a long time, I had very horrible social skills, because I felt like that, what was the point in getting to know me if no one knew who I really was? And I moved to Detroit and hung out at Palmer Park when I was a youth. And I started to see people who looked like how I identified. And so that started my whole journey through transition. And I didn't transition until I was 24. I'm currently 28. So 4 years ago, when I finally decided that I've had enough, I had 2 people who really supported me. One of them was my mother, and the other one was a friend of mine, who basically told me, like, regardless to what path you choose in life, I'll still love you. And that was like the turning point for me. And with those people's support, I transitioned. My mother was there with me every step of the way. She went to therapy with me. She told the therapist my concerns, which I do believe that what Emani said was, when you don't understand something, a lot of times we get lumped into these misconceptions of what it is to be transgender, whether it be murder, sex work, HIV, and my mom had all of those concerns.
And hold that right there, because we're going to take a break right now. You're Spiritually Speaking on Urban Nation Radio with Reverend Darlene Franklin and my guests, Emani Love and Bree Campbell. Hang in there with us. Call in if you have questions at 313-867-1305 or 313-867-1306. Hello, welcome back to Spiritually Speaking with Reverend Darlene Franklin. And my guests, we are having Transgender Conversations. And so at the break, we were talking with Campbell about her journey and her transitioning. And I'm going to let you continue in that how was that for you and when you actually made up your mind to transition?
When I made up my mind, I had a lot of people who supported me in my gayness, and I use that term very loosely because I think that this conversation will lead into the whole misconceptions. And when I started to tell people about my transition, it was all of those negative things. You're too tall. You don't have the right body. You look like this, you look like that. These things are going to happen to you. So it kind of pushed me back into this shell that I had, this protection. So I just went along with it silently. So my mom and my friend knew that I was transitioning and no one else did. And then I remember the first day that I actually presented to society as a woman. And I noticed that it was an issue for everyone else except for everyone else who knew me, and it wasn't an issue for society. So I had these long, drawn-out conversations with my girlfriends about safety issues, and what do we do if a guy's interested in you? How do we start that conversation? And it was kind of overwhelming for me, so it kind of reverted me back, and I started to eliminate a lot of people in my life who were toxic to me. And I felt like that at this moment that I was finally free, it was all of these people trying to hold on to me and trying to hold me down. And I wanted to fly. So in order to fly, I had to let those people go. And my transition was relatively easy. I was discriminated against once for housing in the city of Detroit, and I fought it. But because there is no protection for gender identity, I lost my case. And that started my work in activism. So I started working at Wayne State. And through that process and having people support me, not just family and friends, but people on an academic level, employment, it helped me thrive. And it allowed me to know that regardless to what I was going through internally, a lot of people don't understand that being trans is also in part a mental issue. And I think it's very disrespectful that, if we were going to corporate America, people don't have to disclose their mental issue that they are going through. And I feel like that anytime that I've applied for a job, anytime that I've done anything that required a birth certificate, an ID, any form of identification, I would be looked at funny or discriminated against because now my issues that I have that I feel like are personal, that are between me and my therapist, are now on the forefronts of everybody's mind. And I think that because people don't have education, they automatically shy away from it. And I do believe that when it comes to the trans community, we, other people feel like that the general public concern is greater than our concern. So like outing us and telling us that we can't use the bathrooms that we identify with. And society doesn't understand that by doing this, they put us at a greater risk of being assaulted, and even being murdered. And I don't think people really understand that trans women are murdered at a crazy rate in this country, and there are no protections. Actually, California just passed a law banning the trans panic defense. So what would happen is if a man or a woman killed a trans person, they could always go to the defense that, well, I found out that this person wasn't who I thought that they were, so I killed them. And so California is the first state to actually take a stand on that and say that regardless to how you feel about someone, that does not give you the right to be able to murder them. So I'm glad that we're having these conversations, especially about the trans community, because I don't think that they're really had. I think that a lot of people speak for us, and they speak to these crazy ideas and these crazy notions that we're going to go into a woman's bathroom and sexually assault women or children, and I don't think that that's true. Society thinks that we don't live normal lives. But I know trans men and women who are mothers and fathers, who take care of families, who work, who are politicians, lawyers, doctors, and I think those voices need to be heard so that people can see that this is not just an issue that is specific to 6 Mile and Woolworth, but it's an issue everywhere.
I two things that struck me that you said is when people think that, and on one of our last conversations that we had last week, somebody made a comment about the ladies on Woodward catcalling at them and said that you should tell them not to do that because what if I would have had a gun or something? Mm-hmm. Well, and it made me think, well, why can't they catcall at you? You know, men have been doing that to women
for years.
For years. And does that, and why would that violence be the first thing that you would think of doing? The other thing that stood out for me is having to air everything about us, or everything about this is for gays and lesbians as well. You know, that we have to talk about how do we have sex, and you know, who else has to do that? You know, who else has to talk about or reveal what our mental issues are, or what's going on? So my question is, do you really think that people really, well, let me put it this way, I don't think that people really have to understand what being a lesbian is for them to be able to accept me in everyday life.
I think it all boils down to love. And my mother and my father loved each other, but I never dared ask them how they had sex. That was never anything that crossed my mind because they loved each other. And I think that when you break it down, love is you can love anybody. Love doesn't have a definition. It doesn't say that, oh, because I'm a man, I have to love women, or because I'm a woman, I have to love men. You can love anybody. And I think that that's where people get invasive, because they feel like that because they don't understand us, they want to know what our body looks like and how we have sex and how our partners identify and are our partners gay. And I think that all of those misconceptions not only hinder us from being successful and having loving relationships and being a part of the community, it also affects those people who love us, because then those people are questioned. Like, for instance, my mom is my mother. She will always be my mother. She will always love me. And she's had times where people have come up to her and asked her, like, how could you love your son? And my mom was like, how, you mean my daughter? How can I not love my daughter? And today on the radio, they were having a conversation on name a thing that your child can do that would make you disown them. And I remember saying to the person who I was writing with, like, how is that even a question? How do you as a parent how do you even have that thought process of, if my child did this and this and this, I would disown them? And it's funny because growing up, you know, I have, my mom has friends, and all of my mom's friends whose children have committed crimes, that's forgivable. But my transition is that thing that people are like, oh, I don't know if I could deal with that. And I'm like, how can you deal with the fact that your son murdered 3 people and he's now sitting in jail? So I feel like that regardless to the success that I have in my life, I always have this monkey on my back that's like scratching me, and it's like, oh, you know, she got a monkey and it's on her back. Like, look at her monkey. And it's like, no, like, everybody has these things that they have to carry and walk around with. And I don't think that one sin is greater than the other.
How do you think that, and I know conversations like this is one of the ways that we can bring more normalcy to the trans community, if you will, because that's what, to be more visible, that it's sort of like when we got to a place with the LGBT community, that we are here to stay and deal with it, you know. And so again, I think it's important that your voices be heard, that you become more visible, that nobody can do that work for you. The violence. does the violence occur more among trans women than it does trans men? And if so, why do you think that?
Okay. There is a statistic that shows that trans women are victims of more brutal hate crimes than any other identity in the world. Statistically.
Wow.
So, excuse me. So statistically wise, trans women do face a greater risk of harm and violence and brutality than trans men, statistically. I think, no matter where you are, nobody is exempt from having to, deal with violence. I think we're all privy to it in a way. Sometimes, some not as much as others. And when I think about the trans woman, depending on how she identifies, I think about the layers of oppression. And I talked about this during one retreat. I identify as a Black queer trans woman. So because I'm Black, I have to deal with the oppression of white supremacy and racism. Because I'm queer, I identify as queer, I have to deal with heterosexism and homophobia. And because I'm trans, I have to deal with cis sexism and cis privilege and transphobia. And just because I'm a woman, I have to deal with patriarchy and sexism. So it's like, why even exist? And so I understand when I look at the oppression of the trans woman, as I do any other identity, I look at what social institutions really stop the progression of these people. It's not an act of progression when someone who identifies as trans has to go through all kinds of hell to require surgery to help their bodies shape into the vision that they have for themselves. I find it to be oppressive when I have to go to get my name changed. I pay all this money, have an open hearing, and I have to struggle to get my name changed in every institution that I'm involved in. So when I look at these things, it really kind of clicks in my mind and makes so much sense. When you are someone who has to deal with a lot of oppression, internally, externally, and institutionally, I think that oppression has its way of, it's almost like an undertone of some sort that always creates different barriers for us to have to navigate through.
I understand that. I in class, I think it's one of the reasons why, too, I'm completing my degree so late in life, because everywhere I go, I'm faced with one of those walls of oppression. Everywhere I go. And especially because I'm masculine identified, in class, I'm around a lot of people, but I'm isolated. I'm always alone, and people are mistaking that, if I sit next to you, she's gonna hit on me, and I'm like, honey, don't flatter yourself, please. It's like, what do you think we do all day long? This is what we do all day long, where I'm at the point in my life, I just want to be. I just want to be. But I think I look at it as a spiritual journey, to save the world. You know what I mean? It's kind of like I was put here for just the way that I am for such a time as this. And I think that it is to, again, I truly believe in, if you can't love me who you see every day, just as I am, how can you say you love God?
Exactly.
So, and I think that's what I put in people's face every day. And why do I have to identify as anything? But yet whoever I choose to identify as, let me be that. I used to tell my children that you don't have to be out in the world fighting my battle as a gay person, lesbian, homosexual, but you do have to fight for me to be. So it's when I think about the challenges of our young people, and I think about the roads that you have come, as far as them educating themselves, as far as them finding employment, how do you think that's go? How do you think our young people are coming out on the scene today? They just, because I went through all kinds of things, coming out, and I don't want to be this, but nowadays I'm like seeing kids and young people, I'm out, deal with it, whatever I'm doing. And so when I see them, I'm thinking about how do you see them navigating all of those places and spaces?
I think that now that lifestyles are just open in general, people have more education. There's TV, internet, YouTube. So anything that you are thinking about in your life, you can Google or question, and there's all of these resources that pop up. As when I was growing up, although we had internet, it was in its beginning stages, and there were a lot of the things that I learned about trans women growing up were very negative. I knew RuPaul, and I remember my stepfather and some friends of his having a conversation about RuPaul being a good-looking woman, but she was a man. And I remember that conversation because these men were still able to identify that she looked nice, but then it was like that but. And I think that the bigger issue that trans people have to deal with is not a trans issue, it's a life issue, that historically being feminine in any way, shape, or form is looked at as less than. And so back to the conversation. Yes, exactly.
Say that again, say it real loud.
Patriarchy and sexism.
Exactly. And it's funny how a lot of times how I have to debate with women who identify, who dress masculine, but identify still as women, as to how can you do this, go through this process and change your body. And to me, it's like, okay, well, you want to wear a male's clothes, and I don't ever question how you dress or how you identify. But then when it comes down to like trans women or even trans men who decide to go that route medically, I know of trans men who have been shut out from the lesbian community because people don't understand, well, how can you take testosterone? How do you grow a beard? Like, how do you change something that you were born with? Because people think that, and I don't think that God makes mistakes. I think that God allows us all to go through journeys that will better, provide the glory for Him. And it boggles me that it's always these questions of, like, I feel like we deal with the crabs in a barrel, where everyone has these issues and everyone's trying to climb to the top, and we can never work together to get to the top because everyone's like climbing all over on top of each other because we have all of these hosts of issues. And I think that until we start really having a conversation about women and the power of women and allowing women to grow up in spaces where they're allowed to be in charge of their own lives and navigate, the world without having to deal with, those ideas of, well, you're a woman, so, or, because you're a woman, it really bothers me. And I think that that's the bigger conversation that we need to have as a society, because as a man, men could do anything that they want to, but it's funny how, I watch TV and things that the slightest thing that a man does that is feminine, his sexuality has to come into question.
Talk to me before I go to break about a little bit about the homophobia, I guess that's what you would call it, within the LGBT community towards trans women. We all know it's there.
Oh.
We all know it's there. It's there. It's there.
It's definitely transphobia. Yeah, so transphobia, by definition, is fear, hatred, and discrimination against transgender and gender nonconforming people, and that's definitely prevalent in our LGBTQ communities. I've always wondered how people could compare gender with your attraction, with your attractionality. It's because they're so different. You know, they're defined differently, gender and attraction. And you know, a lot of people don't look at things holistically. Like, attraction is a holistic thing. It's much more than sexual attraction. You have physical attraction, emotional attraction, spiritual attraction, intellectual attraction. There are so many
attraction.
Absolutely. So let's not limit something, you know, because you know, a lot of terms are much more fluid than how people perceive them, or how people think what people think they mean. And even gender is such a fluid term. I mean, when you look at the gender spectrum, I mean, there are so many identities. I mean, transgender, cisgender, gender nonconforming, intersex. What else? There are so many different. My goodness.
It's just easier to just love people
Absolutely.
before I can, you know, think about, oh, okay, you know, it's just too much. So why don't we just love people based on the character of what they present?
And that's so simple.
Isn't that too simple?
It
so
sounds
simple.
so simple.
It sounds simple. And we're going to take a break. You are on Spiritually Speaking with Darlene Franklin and my guests, Bree Campbell and Emani Love, and we'll be right back. Welcome back to Spiritually Speaking. I'm Reverend Darlene Franklin. If you have questions, please call in at 313-867-1305 or 313-867-1306. Talk to me about the spirituality, religion, church. How are you? Do you worship? Do you believe? Do you not believe? And what do you think churches have to offer today for our transgender community?
I feel like that very few churches or even places of worship are LGBT friendly. So that's my first. And this is coming from someone who has attended church and also has spent some time at a Muslim mosque. And the difference between the two was, I think that Islam is very homophobic when it comes to men, but they understand that gender identity is not something that can't be controlled. So for instance, I was able to go into the mosque and be open about my trans identity and still be able to use, you know, female facilities and still was respected as a woman, versus me coming out to a church and people misgendering me or feeling the need to have to tell other people, like, oh, well, we just warning men about you. I have been to churches that have been very affirming. So it's not just about the church or the mosque. It's about religion in itself. So I think that people don't really understand the love of God. And I think that people take these books and they pick and choose what they want to take out of them and what they want to believe. Because the Bible that I've read said there's a lot of things that are sins. And it's funny how, and I've been to churches where the sermon has nothing to do with homosexuality, but it somehow is wiggled in there. Like, oh, and if you're gay. And it's funny because how people say that that's the only sin that you can't repent from. which is not true, because if people really had an understanding of the Bible and really understood even religion in itself, they would know that God is love and that God knew us before we were born. And I think that that's the thing that I take away from religion. So a lot of times I find myself going into religious spaces being hurt. And now that I'm an adult and I don't have to sit in those spaces, I now have a voice to be able to say, you are wrong. You might want to rethink about how you said that, or that's plain out offensive. I remember when I went to a church in Detroit, a mega church with a pastor that's very famous, and the first lady is very famous as well. And they were talking about something, and the preacher was preaching, and some guy got up and he grabbed the microphone and he was like, all homosexuals are going to hell. And so I got offended. And there was this row that's in the church that's called Sugar Hill. And it was all of these gay men that I saw previously the night before at the bar with their boyfriends, partners, whatever the case may be. And they were like, you better preach! And I was with the guy who I was dating at the time, and we had got into an argument at church, which I was like, that's an oxymoron. Like, how do I get into an argument at church?
That's the best place to argue.
Right.
Anyway.
And so he kept saying homosexuals are going to hell, homosexuals are all this other stuff. And so after service was over, one of the guys who was sitting in Sugar Hill walked up to me, and he said, you shouldn't get so easily offended. And my comment to him was, I'm not going to support, whether it be physically or financially, a place that is going to discriminate against me. And it was funny because when offering time came, they all gave their offerings. And I thought that's funny that, and this man knows that there's a lot of gay people that go to his church because his wife is very famous among the gays. And that you would condemn these people and still turn around and expect them to support you financially. And that didn't make sense to me. And I left thinking that there should be a study about religion and LGBT communities, because I do think that a lot of times that those are like the worst places, and church is supposed to be a healing place. And I've known of people who go to these churches where they're constantly being condemned for their lifestyle, and I don't understand how that's healing.
So, our young people, are they going to church? Are they finding spiritual spaces for healing? And what do they talk about it in the spaces in Ruth Ellis?
Well, it's hard to find a church because of the very heavy emphasis of heterosexism. Mm-hmm. It makes it difficult for people especially people who are traditionalist Christians, to really be progressive and understand attractionality and gender identity beyond the Bible. Mm-hmm. You know, so I identify as a universal affirmationist of spirituality. Okay. Meaning that I affirm truth in all that is. Everything has validity. All things have truth. So I've had my own individual journeys with religion. I used to go to a church actually not too far from Urban Nation Radio headquarters that was extremely transphobic and very homophobic. And I tried to stick it out there. I think more than anything, I really wanted to, I think I had a desire to want to really immerse myself in Christianity. But I couldn't, that wasn't fulfilled because my identity wasn't affirmed. And so that put me in a bad space. I'm like, well, if this is God's love, I don't want it.
And let me turn to the camera. No, that is not God's love.
It's not.
Jesus was not a Christian. And so that is, and neither is God. And so that is what keeps me encouraged when and I have this struggle within myself all the time. You know, I hate that Christianity Shanghai Jesus, because when I read in the books, Jesus is about the truth. Jesus is about love. Jesus, one of my favorite passages is the story of the Good Samaritan, you know, and how the person just stopped and cared for and supplied the need and took, not just healed the wound, but found a place for the person to live and made sure that the person was cared for. And this is the crux of what the gospel of Christ is supposed to be about. And so to tack a religion on that is, I think it's more damaging than what is good. And the problem that I have with our religious places of worship is that the person who is to be the ambassador for Jesus Christ should be the first to present love. I had an experience sitting at a table with a group of pastors, and one of them felt real good that when a transgender woman came into his church, that he took them in the back and he prayed for them. And I was like, and what example, when did Jesus ever show you that example? Exactly. It is to be the pastor that would stand in front of all of the congregation and welcome all of God's people and pray. If you're standing there calling for the person to come and join and be saved, and why do you have to take that person in the back to pray for them? Stand right there in front of everybody as the ambassador of Jesus Christ and show forth love, because the pastor is the first person who's supposed to set the example, not how the congregation would feel. And so I think that if more of that would come out of our churches, then I think that we would not see as many people turning to the streets for survival. Exactly. And that being said, a little bit about specifically, how do you think, or what do you think should be happening to address the violence towards our transgender community, especially in that Woodward area?
More than anything, saying as though there has been a multitude of trans women across the nation, across the world, who have been murdered in the last year. I think that more than anything, well, not more than anything, but a significant piece of that is teaching people in media how to properly reference us. It's already enough that somebody was murdered, because of discrimination. Mm-hmm. You're going to continue to discriminate against them after they're gone, after they're out of this life. And so so that makes me kind of think about, some people don't know what terms to use. So we're not going to assume that every male body identifies as a man. We just can't do that. We're not going to assume that every female body person identifies as a woman, because we know that's not true. So it's just, it breaks my heart when I hear my sisters who were murdered being misgendered on the news, in the media.
So it means that we have to continue to have more conversations like this, that we have used up all of our time, unfortunately. But I just thank you so much for coming and talking with us this evening on Spiritually Speaking at Urban Nation Radio. We thank our sisters Bree Campbell and Emani Love.
Thank you for
having
a conversation.
doing wonderful work in the community, and this will not be the last time that I will have you back. Thank you so much. Please join us next week at the same time and same place.